This video is brought to you by my wonderful members and Super Chat sponsors. Click the join button to become a member. The Hatman, a dark, menacing entity known for terrorizing people across the world, young and old alike. This being is most commonly said to stalk his victims while they sleep, often waking them to witness his dark figure looming over them as they lie there, helpless and paralyzed. What would you do, though, if you encountered the Hatman while you were wide awake, going about your day? Listen to these stories and let me know. I also have a special treat for you. A new friend of mine will be reading the first story tonight. Please give a warm, dreamer welcome to my friend, Fear Street. Enjoy.
When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. They lived in this old-school World War II era A-frame house. If you haven't seen them before, it's basically like someone took the triangular rooftop part of a normal house and plopped it on the ground, making a whole house out of that. It was actually a little creepy to me as a kid, especially the room that my grandmother kept all her dolls and other knickknacks in. When we would go visit, my brothers and I would have a choice of two rooms. One was my aunt's old bedroom, and the other was the dollhouse room I mentioned earlier. Normally, my brothers were absolutely ruthless, charging in and claiming my aunt's old room, leaving me alone to brave the creepiness of the menagerie of dolls in the other one. I wasn't allowed to share the same room. A girl needs her space, Grandma used to say. However, one time when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I got the jump on them, and for the very first time, slid my way into the good spot before they got there. Before I go on, I should tell you that I've always been somewhat sensitive to spiritual things. I'd never call myself a medium or psychic, but I'd often pick up on, for lack of a better term, feelings in certain environments. Standing triumphantly in my aunt's room, I looked around, familiarizing myself with the layout. I'd only been in there one other time that I could remember. As I stood there, silently congratulating myself for my victory over the boys, I took in the feel of the room. It was a mixture of both awe and a slight, eerie chill. My aunt's old toys were scattered along the dresser. I wanted to examine and experience everything. Strange as it may be, it was sort of like the feeling you get when going into an amusement park. Maybe it was just the euphoria of not having to sleep with creepy old dolls, but the excitement was nearly all-consuming. I felt extra special in that moment. It was a feeling I didn't get very often as a child. The rest of the day went as you'd expect. I played with toys, hung out with my brothers and grandparents, and eventually headed off to sleep in the least creepy room in the house, or so I thought. The next thing I remember is waking up in the middle of the night. It was still pitch black in the house, the only illumination coming in from the street lights outside. I woke up with an urgent need to go to the bathroom, probably too much soda, which was a treat reserved only for our visits to Grandma and Grandpa's house. As I went to get up, something in my mind told me to stop. It was another feeling, almost a knowing, that it wasn't safe to get out of bed. My eyes scanned the dim walls from corner to corner around the room. When I looked into the doorway, I saw it. The orange glow of the street lamps outlined a tall, slender figure, cloaked in deep shadow. A man. He leaned against the open door with a relaxed, casual air about him. His arms folded with a hand reaching up, pinching the end of his equally shadowed, wide-brimmed hat. My first thought was, what the heck is a cowboy doing in the house? That was exactly how it looked to my 7-year-old brain. I was staring at the silhouette of a cowboy leaning against the doorframe. Something told me, though, that this was not a human being. It was something else. I instinctively threw the sheets over my head. I wasn't scared at the moment. I was simply confused and didn't know what else to do. As my need to use the toilet became more intense, I contemplated trying to somehow run past whatever the thing in the doorway was. I started asking myself, why is that thing here? Suddenly, and this may be hard for anyone to understand, I felt the sensation of words being spoken, the same way you hear things in your head. I heard this reverberating in my chest. I know it doesn't make sense, but that's the only way I can describe it. "There's a girl here," someone said, seemingly in answer to my question. After a few more minutes, my bladder began to feel as if it was going to explode. I decided to peek above the sheets to see if the cowboy was still there. I poked my head out slowly and silently. He was still there, motionless under the threshold. I waited, hiding from him until I somehow fell asleep, despite the pain in my bladder. I have to admit, I was very afraid by that point. When I awoke the next morning, I didn't tell anyone. I'm not sure why. My aunt's room never held that same magical fascination for me after that. The odd thing is, it still wasn't as creepy as the doll room.
This story is based on a Reddit post from the subreddit r/ghost stories by user HKO Papa Kalash 69, entitled Paranormal Experiences at My Ranch. The link will be in the description box below if you want to check out the original post. My name is Cal. My grandpa has this ranch about 25 miles east of Payson, Arizona. For those in the state, it's between Hagler Creek and Highway 260. It's very secluded, but the land is really good for grazing. These days, I spend a lot of time running Jersey cattle on the range. Every night, one of my crew members rides out to check on the cattle dispersed out in the fields, and to check on the fence line for holes in the wire. A few days ago, it was my turn to go out and check on the herd. It was about 1:30 a.m. as I made my way out. Along my route, I noticed rustling in the tree line that ran along the fence perimeter. At first, it didn't seem like anything unusual. I figured it was just coyotes or squirrels. I see them a lot up there. It went away for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then it popped back up again. The second time I heard it, I was off my horse and walking him to a little watering spot. The cows were about 150 to 200 yards away, just within my view with the strong moonlight that night. I heard the rustling noise again, but this time, it seemed to have much more weight behind it. My horse, Vegas, and I both looked up at the same time, wondering what the hell we were hearing. At that point, I came to the eerie realization that whatever was out there was most likely tracking me and Vegas. It didn't seem so interested in the cows. I decided I would try to attempt to scare off whatever it was. I got back on my horse and grabbed my whip, uncoiling it by my leg. I always carry a whip while on patrol and working with animals. I don't use it on the livestock, but rather to make a loud crack to move the cattle, so I cracked it a few times, into the night. As the noise echoed through the air, the rustling stopped. The forest outside the fence line went dead quiet. Figuring the whip got the job done, I went back to count the heads of cattle. I marked 38 heads. Every cow was accounted for, so I started on my way back to the house. I was about 3.5 miles away from the stables, so it was a bit of a trail ride to get back. There was a solid 10 minutes or so of silence before I heard the rustling again. At that point, I was getting pretty pissed. I figured it was one of those dumbass coyotes thinking we were going to lead him somewhere. It was time for a more direct course of action, but first I had to call my grandfather. There's literally zero cell service out there, so we communicate with radios when we're downrange. I told him I was going to fire my gun, just giving him a heads up so he wouldn't get worried. I reached down and pulled out my Colt 45 revolver from my side holster. I fired one round into the air. The rustling stopped as the shot rang out through the woods. My ears rang and the smell of gunpowder filled my nose as the smoke settled. Vegas didn't appreciate the blast. After I calmed him down a bit, I started riding back again, only for the rustling to come back 5 minutes later. I started getting really nervous at this point, because most coyotes would be long gone after the shot rang out. On top of that, I was in a narrow corridor-like area, with woods on either side of a dirt path. I didn't have a flashlight on me because I forgot to grab it, like an idiot. I had to use my iPhone flashlight as I dismounted. I slowly walked over to the tree line where I heard the rustling. I already had my gun out, ready for whatever animal it was to jump out at me or something. I flashed the surprisingly weak light around, trying my best to see into the clearings in the trees. The rustling suddenly started again, seemingly about 100 feet off my right side. I quickly turned around, and to my surprise and confusion, I saw a black silhouette of a horse run short ways across the trail. My first thought was, crap, is that one of our horses? Whose horse is that? I rode over to where I saw the horse, and an eerie feeling swept over me. I started shaking with anxiety as I looked around. I started to wonder how a horse could have possibly ran out of and back into the forest that was so thick with shrubbery. On second thought, it seemed physically impossible. It was impossible. When I looked behind me to start heading back to Vegas and get the hell out of there, I stopped frozen in fear. A deep, shuddering chill crawled down my neck. My hands went nearly numb, and I dropped my gun. I heard the sound of it hitting the ground as it echoed through the woods. In front of me, about 50 feet away, was the silhouette of a man. I couldn't make out much detail, but I could see that he was wearing a flat-brimmed hat and what looked like a pair of chaps. He was like some kind of walking shadow. I dropped down to pick up my gun. I quickly regained my bearings and held my gun up to aim at the area where the dark stranger stood. But by the time I got my sights back up, he had vanished completely. Without wasting a moment longer, I got back on Vegas and rode like the wind to get the hell out of there. The whole way back, I had my head on a swivel constantly, looking behind me in fear of it following. I made it back and told my grandpa. He helped me calm down and said that he'd had some weird experiences out there as well. If you made it to the end, thank you. And if anyone has any idea what I could have encountered out there, let me know.
What's up, guys? This is Amon from Fear Street. I have a channel here on YouTube where I narrate scary stories. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening and invite you guys to come and check out my channel. And also I'd like to give a huge thanks to Mr. X. Thank you so much for having me. And also thank you so much for the other things that you've done for me behind the scenes. I appreciate you so much. And yeah, maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Alright, my friends, what haunting accounts with this mysterious cowboy shadow hat man? Very interesting. Thanks again to Fear Street for lending his excellent vocal talents to this video. Make sure you go check out his channel after the discussion and let him know that I sent you. Don't forget to represent the dreamers while you're there. Alright, so I'll get into my thoughts and then we will check out what the dreamers listening to the live show have to say. So, the first story was quite different from the common encounter with the Hatman. There's definitely a shadowy figure wearing a hat, but it's missing that trademark, menacing presence that you're used to. On top of that, most individuals who report sightings of the Hatman are almost always experiencing sleep paralysis at the same time, but the child in that story was able to move freely in and out of the sheets, the blankets that she was using to cover her face. Many have also theorized that the dark entity known as the Hatman may actually feed off the fear it induces in its terrified victims. The second story was a wild one, for sure, in my opinion. I found myself mentally entering the shoes of the young man that this happened to. While I was in that headspace, I kind of got a strange feeling. Let me know what you think about this idea. The encounter took place out in the far reaches of a ranch, outside. The original poster, whom I decided to call Cal, is, for all intents and purposes, a cowboy. The shadowy figure we heard about here was apparently a male figure with a wide-brimmed hat, possibly wearing chaps. A very fashionable hat man indeed, but one specifically suited for the environment in which he was encountered. That's another oddity when it comes to the hat man encounters. This made me think of two theories. One, this unidentified shadow person may have been comprised of residual energy from an actual cowboy and his horse that once worked the fields just as Cal does today. As a matter of fact, who's to say it wasn't someone doing his job as a cowboy in the dimension next door? Perhaps where Cal stood, this mysterious man saw a shadow from his own perspective. he saw his own shadow cowboy Hatman in his reality. This leads me to my other theory. What if what Cal was seeing was a past or future version of himself and his trusty horse Vegas, almost like he's seeing an after image or a premonition? It's questions like these that make me so fascinated by stories of shadow people encounters. There's so much discussion to be had about what the possibilities really could be. And if you're anything like me, you try to be humble enough to admit the fact that really anything is possible, given what little we understand about how reality works. Very interesting stuff to think about. So, my friend, what do you think about these two stories of these shadowy cowboy hat men? What kind of entity do you suppose was described in these chilling encounters? Do you think they might be related? What do you think it was that Susie saw in her doorway that night? What would you have done if a shadowy entity stood between you and the toilet you so desperately needed? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Now I'll open up the floor to the dreamers to weigh in. Remember, if you want a chance at your question or comment showing up in a future video, or the chance to sponsor a video with a super chat, turn on notifications so that you can catch the live reading and discussion. And also, join my Discord. I always post alerts there as well. Alright, so Brett says, I've seen a Hatman type entity in a sick kid's hospital. It just sat on the bench looking out the window. A few times, it tucked my roommate and I in and patted us on the head before sitting down again. That's something else. That's pretty crazy. Brett, you gotta tell me, were you a sick kid in the hospital and you were visited by this hat man or shadowy individual with a hat on, and it was actually taking care of you, showing some concern? Interesting. Sleepy says, sounds like whatever was stalking him was disguising itself as something that looked less threatening. Interesting idea. I wonder why, if that thing was indeed stalking him, why would it feel the need to look less threatening and not continue to terrorize or even attack the people it's stalking? Very strange behavioral pattern if that was the case. Sunny Gabe says, it could prove very useful to know more ideas. What were the sounds in the bushes like? How old is the forest or the woods that are around the property? Very interesting questions there, Sunny Gabe. Now that I think about it, it might be interesting to know what has happened. What's the history of that property? Has anything taken place that might have resulted in restless spirits or something more than the average paranormal activity on a location? Cindy S. says, it could be a cowboy who didn't leave after his death. He just stayed there and continued to work. Also, if the poster grew up a cowboy, it could be one of his ancestors just checking on him. That's a fascinating idea. I don't know whether this, maybe he might have mentioned it in the comments or something, but I'm not sure if this is in the poster's family line, because conceivably there could very well have been other ancestral cowboys that worked that land in that same area, and they rode horses just like he does. Very touching sentiment right there. Antonio says, for these non-menacing shadow people encounters, my theory is that maybe they're people from another dimension that leak into ours, but are not fully rendered. Hence, we only see a shadow. Antonio, that's another one of those really compelling theories about shadow people, in my opinion. I love thinking about that and pondering and discussing it with people just like you. And in a way, that theory sort of explains both menacing and docile or even helpful shadow people. Like in one of the last videos that I did, I'll try to leave a link to that one in the description of this video. But there are some shadow people that actually go out of their way to help people. There's one that looked like it was trying to wash dishes, and there was one that opened up all the doors and windows in someone's house, and they later found out that there was a gas leak that might have killed them if that didn't happen. So very interesting stuff there. And finally, Tariko says the Cowboy Hatman should be known as the Chapman. That is an awesome idea, and I was going to say, alright, so I'm going to close this video out now, but I was going to use the code word Vegas because I love the name Vegas for a horse. It's a super dope name. But the Chapman, as in a man who wears chaps and is also a hat man, that is 100% a better code word. So, if you're still listening here, I want you to work the name the Chapman, or refer to this entity as the Chapman, in the comments down below so I can see you. Alright, my friends, take care, enjoy the rest of your night, and I will see you later. Alright. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and share. If you made it to the very end, you're exactly the kind of subscriber I'm looking for. Don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way, you can catch the live show and discuss the stories with me. Your input might even appear in my next video. Last thing, if you heard a code word after the story, type it in a comment down below so I know who the real dreamers are. Take care, my friend. Until next time.